Hola mi gente, ¿cómo están? Alba aquí en el canal Seriela para hablar de libros, a veces en español de Puerto Rico. Good evening, how's everybody today? My name is Alba Mar, you may call me Alba. The channel is Seriela and we're here to talk about books. I'm going to continue today with what I had been talking about in my last video before the camera cut me off. Luckily, as a matter of fact, because I don't know if you noticed it, but that day I was pretty sad. And we'll talk about it a little bit later. But first, a brief update. I finished Three Souls. Was that ever good? I highly recommend it. Three Souls by Janie Chang takes place in during the Civil War in China and during the 1930s. And the main protagonist is deceased already, and her spirit, her ghost, is accompanied by three souls that are witnessing her life and trying to figure out what happened, what went wrong. And I thoroughly enjoyed the whole thing, especially the end. So check it out. Three Souls by Janie Chang. And then I continued a little bit into the Nationalist heroines, started reading a little bit about Blanca Canales, who was the woman who at, I think, 42 or 44 years of age, declared the Republic of Puerto Rico in October 30th, 1950 in Jayuya. And later on, I'll continue reading about her and the treatment she received in federal prison for that uprising. Yeah, we'll talk about her later. Basically, everything else stayed the same, right? I had been wanting to talk about my mammoth and how that reading was going, and the mammoth is At Canaan's Edge, right? And I was telling you a little bit about my reading of the mammoth. First of all, when this book starts in 1965, Malcolm X has already passed. They've already assassinated Malcolm X. Let me stop right here and excuse the noise. Today is viernes social. Viernes social means it's a party night. Friday is party night. And we'll be hearing music because there's a festival in the plaza in this direction. And then maybe we'll hear music coming from the boom boxes on wheels here in the garage, in the gasoline station. So anyways, I was saying, this book starts off with the march on Pettus Bridge, which was called Bloody Sunday. And I had not realized when I first started reading the book, only later on did I come to realize that it took place in March. And it was such an odd feeling to know that I was reading in March a historic event that occurred in March in 1965. And the first one, Bloody Sunday, occurred on March 7th of 1965, which is when I think mounted police and state troopers, that's when John Lewis got his head bashed in, along with dozens and dozens of other people. That's why it's called Bloody Sunday. So then, after Bloody Sunday, the call was put out for more people to come to march on the next day. This book is written in chronological order, and Taylor Branch collects practically everything of importance that happened on those dates. First, on March 7th, And then on March 8th, the court injunctions about how they could march, and Martin Luther King's dilemma and conflict. Should he march? Should he not march? They decide to march. But then on that day, instead of there being a Bloody Monday, both the troopers and the sheriffs and the security forces withdraw, and Dr. Martin Luther King, after having people kneel in prayer at Pettus Bridge, also decides to withdraw, which causes its own conflicts later on within the group, right? And then the third march that takes place is the final big march from Selma to Birmingham once the injunction is lifted. During all of this, Taylor Branch, as I've said, is just masterful in it reads like a novel, for real. It's very dense, has a lot of details, but it is so engaging because at the same time that Taylor Branch is talking about civil rights issues and what's happening in the movement and what is occurring with Dr. Martin Luther King, he's also talking about LBJ, President Johnson, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and his efforts to get Medicare passed, his efforts to get the Voting Rights Bill passed, and of course Vietnam and his deployment of Marines to Vietnam and how he wants to keep that hushed for a while. So there are a lot of things happening all at the same time. Finally, which is what I was going to tell you about the last video, during that last march, the marchers arrive at the Capitol in Birmingham, where Wallace is ensconced, right? Hidden away in the Capitol building. And Dr. Martin Luther King starts to make his speech, right? And Taylor Branch, obviously delighted in Dr. Martin Luther King's gift for oratory. And he describes it very beautifully. Practically line by line, what Dr. King was saying at that speech in Birmingham. He describes the intonations, the rise and fall of his voice, and then he describes how Dr. King starts quoting from Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is considered the national anthem for African Americans. And that's when I lost it. I don't know if you noticed, but I cried for an hour. I cried for an hour when I realized that Dr. King was quoting from Lift Every Voice and Sing. Because, as I was telling you, and as I told you in my newbie tag, I was raised on the west side of Chicago in an all-black community in a school with primarily black students. I had a lot of black teachers, and every February, Mrs. Metellus, our choir instructor and fourth grade teacher, and Mr. Ransom, who also taught song and music, would have us practice again, because we'd already learned it, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And we would sing it every year at the assembly for what was at that time just Negro History Week. It was not a month, it was 1 week. And we would have an assembly, and we would sing, lift every voice and sing. Yeah. And it just brought back so many memories, beautiful memories, touching memories about that time in my life. And I felt profoundly grateful to have learned that song and to have recognized it, right, in the book. But at the same time, I had to remember, right, which is why I was very sad, and why this book is probably going to cause me to cry again. Because Dr. King is not just a painting on the wall in my room, and it's not just a person that I know who gave a beautiful speech and who is written about in books. In 1963, my mother and father were going through a very painful divorce, and my mother was very, very depressed. She would spend all her days in bed and would get up at midnight to clean the house and bang cabinet doors and stuff. But she was mostly out of it, and we were left to fend for ourselves a lot. But when Dr. Martin Luther King came to Chicago in 1963 to Soldiers Field, my mom got up despite her affliction and her pain. She got up and she took my little brother and me to Soldiers Field to listen to Dr. King, to see him, and to march with him from Soldiers Field to City Hall in Chicago. So Dr. Martin Luther King, at that time of my life, was not just a faraway figure in the media. He was somebody that I had seen and that I had marched with, and of course that I respected and admired a lot. And if he could get my mother to get up and march and lift her spirits, then he was a very special person to me. So when I got to that part, I broke down and I cried for an hour. And I'm not going to cry right now because I kept on reading. And I got further along in the book. And I'm not sad anymore. I'm angry. I'm indignant. I've gotten to the part in the book, another part, because I've already read the first two tomes in this trilogy, and I've seen the vile, despicable FBI chief Hoover at work. And after the march on Birmingham, there have already been many, many martyrs, people who have lost their lives in the civil rights movement up to this point. And there was another one after this march, a woman who had come down from Detroit, Viola Liuzzo, and volunteered in any way she could during that march. And she had decided, or they had assigned her, because she had a car, to transport the people back and forth between Selma and Birmingham. And one of the, the normal, what I've seen before in the other two tomes, the KKK, the Night Riders, attacked her and her car, and she died. And I'm no longer sad. because Hoover and the FBI, what we see after Liuzzo's death is how Edgar J. Hoover and the FBI manipulated the media, tried to manipulate President Johnson into believing that Viola Liuzzo was a depraved individual, that she deserved what she got. So, yeah, I'm going to continue reading this book. I'm also going to link down below the rendition of Lift Every Voice and Sing that most reminded me of when I was in school, and the way we used to sing it in my elementary school when we celebrated National Negro History Week, before there was a whole month dedicated to it. When you read these books, these 3 books on the civil rights movement, I become more aware of the fact that a lot of things have not changed. A lot of things have not changed. There's been progress for some, but not for all. And I'm going to continue reading so that I can see those parallels, not only in what's happening in the United States, but what's happening here in Puerto Rico also. I'm sorry, I haven't been, no, I'm not going to apologize for the somber message. I think these are somber times, especially for the generations to come. If we don't, like my mother, get up and march. Nos vemos, mi gente. Cuídense mucho. Adiós.